Boa tarde. Isso parece redundante, mas eu queria elogiar os livros que você escreveu, são realmente muito bons. Prendem a
Praise
atenção.
is never redundant. Thank you. That's good. That's excellent.
Ok.
Yep.
E além a história romana, ela realmente é muito rica em fatores e toda a nossa cultura é baseada no Império Romano. Você tem intenção de escrever sobre a história atual, uma história mais recente do nosso século, com personagens mais atuais?
Writing about recent history has its problems, has its difficulties. It is always tempting to me because my grandfather was born in 1850 and he had my father when he was about 73 years old. So my father was born in 1923. Therefore, in just 2 generations, my family goes back a very, very long way. Usually it would be 4 or 5 generations. So for me, recent history is actually, it's still very alive. I could write about World War II, and my father would be the one who would be providing the research and the memories rather than my grandfather. However, in a way, I like the insulation of having a few centuries between me and the people. Not just because they can't sue, but I think it helps to have a sense of the overall historical perspective. We can judge a period better once a few centuries have passed. I mean, how could I write about a British Prime Minister, for example, today, without being pleased or angry at what he did to my garden? Do you see what I mean? I need to have a distance to enable me to be objective again. For me, the past is something to plunder, and I will be leaving the present to the future in the hopes that there will be writers who want to write about our times, which are just as interesting. And as I said at the beginning, we haven't changed at all. We are the same people. There could be somebody with the abilities of Julius Caesar sitting in this great hall, or Genghis Khan for that matter. I don't know what he would be doing now, running Enron or something like that. Who knows? But we are the same people, and we will create great stories.
Boa tarde. Primeiro, elogiar o livro O Lobo das Planícies. Eu adoro esse livro, do Gengis Khan. Sobre adaptações para cinema de livros, queria saber a opinião do senhor e se desejaria um dia ver um dos livros que o senhor já escreveu nas telas do cinema.
I'd love to. Of course, it would be enormous fun, and there is talk of a Dangerous Book for Boys film, which has always been a surprise because it has no plot and no characters, so it is difficult to see how that could ever be made. But I have hopes. I was told that the film Spartacus took 20 years to make, so although I did get excited when I first heard that someone might want to, that was about 8 years ago. So I'm not holding my breath. The Emperor books may be made into a film. There are various stages, there are about 100 of them. You have to get, a director and a script. And the last thing they said to me in the last meeting was, okay, Conn, all we need to do now is raise $500 million and we'll be fine. So there are obstacles to creating these things, but I have hopes. I may see it yet, and I have read a script. Written by a man called Bill Broyles, who did Apollo 13, and it was good. It was a good script, so I wasn't horrified by a Hollywood treatment where everybody became very, very modern or something like that. It seemed to be a good treatment of the books. So I have my fingers crossed.
Boa noite a todos. Parabéns pelo trabalho. E quanto tempo você gasta com pesquisa para escrever um livro? E quantas horas escreve por dia?
For research, I mean, it never stops. I'm always reading or going to a place. I mean, something like Mongolia, I was out there for about a month, and I made a point of standing where Genghis stood to gather his nation, and I rode the horses and discovered how small the horses were, so that when they lie down to go to sleep, they pull their legs in like big dogs. Little things like that that I couldn't see reading a book at home are very important to me. And also, I write very visually, so I imagine a scene and then describe the scene. I can't do that unless I have seen the place and the people. I mean, I was saying this earlier. One of the things that staggered me about the Mongolians is that they have jet black hair and reddish skin, and they almost worship the pony, hunt with the bow, live in wicker and felt homes, and they are the ancestors of the North American Indian. I did not know that before I went there. They know this. They know that they crossed the Bering Strait, which freezes and can be crossed, and they came down through Canada, and therefore it means the story of Genghis is an Apache story in a way. And that's an extraordinary and important insight that I could not have got unless I had gone to Mongolia. And obviously I have relationships with specialist bookshops in London where if anything crosses their desk with the word Genghis or Kublai or anything, then it comes to me. So I'm always finding books. The older the better, generally. And it never stops, but then it's the little details that I need. I found a monk called William of Rubruck who described Karakorum, the city of the Khans before Kublai Khan, and he described a silver tree made of solid silver that they had in the courtyard for two reasons. One, so that you could see an incredible amount of wealth as you walked into the palace, and secondly, so that you could see the Mongols cared so little for wealth that they would use silver as a casting metal. And that is, that's important. It's the only description of that city that exists. So I have to sometimes search in very strange places to find it. As you may know, the Mongols managed to lose their own history. There was only one book in existence called The Secret History of the Mongols, and they lost every single copy of it. It was only because it had been translated into Chinese that we have it at all today. But even then, I found a very good translation of that by a Mongolian that was much better than my original, with much more detail. And I'm always looking for more details. I like to be accurate as much as I can. You cannot please everybody, especially when it comes to Rome. There will always be arguments. At the beginning of Plutarch's book of Brutus, for example, he says that some people say Brutus was of the noble families, others say that he was of common stock, and that is fine for Plutarch, but you cannot have it both ways when you are writing historical fiction. So you make a choice, whether he was noble or common, and you stick with it, and whoever doesn't agree with you will write you an email, sometimes quite a long one, and explain exactly why you are wrong. And that is quite annoying, in all honesty. But on the other hand, I prefer people to be interested than not interested. And I started really my idea was to prevent that. I put historical notes at the back of each book saying why I had done something, if I had to change it. Sometimes you have to change it. In historical fiction, like life, there can be dull bits. Life sometimes contains years where nothing happens. Nothing really important happens, and if I wrote that, there would be chapters where nothing important happens, and it would be very dull. So I cut them out, which means a problem of my fiction has always been that by the end of the book, the characters are too young, because I have cut out 10 or 15 years from their life, and it's a constant difficulty with me. But I do this because sometimes you have to remember that you're writing fiction as well as history. It's always a slight struggle between the two, just like life. Thank you.
Conn, já vi algumas entrevistas suas na web no qual o entrevistador questionava com os olhos assim do século XXI as ações de Genghis Khan, que ele era bárbaro e etc. Erroneamente uma visão do século XXI questionando uma pessoa do século XIII. A minha pergunta é, como que a Mongólia hoje em dia vê a figura do Genghis Khan? Como um herói ou como um bárbaro?
In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is a hero. He is not only he's the father of the nation. He's the person who managed to take dozens of tribes and weld them together into one nation. But he was the one who gave them a national identity, a sense of identity, which is quite difficult to explain to modern people because we all have it. You are Brazilian. You may be from Sao Paulo, you may be from Rio, you may have an identity there, but you all understand the overarching national identity. And it's difficult. It was interesting with Genghis that hardly anyone had that. The Mongolians certainly did not have that. The Chinese, perhaps apart from the emperor and his own court, someone 1,000 miles away had no concept of being Chinese. He was from the city of Baotou, and maybe not even an important part of that. It is something I try to avoid, and it is sometimes difficult bringing a modern perspective to a historical novel. I say it's difficult because if you remember when they made films about the future in the 1960s, everyone was always wearing 1960s costumes and clothes. It is very hard to truly step outside your milieu, your culture. But I do my best because what I think about a father who has the legal right to strangle his wife and children to death, for example, in Rome, is completely irrelevant. What I would try and do is I could not do that awful thing that people sometimes do in having, to write about the Crusades and to have someone saying, but does God really exist? Should we be Christian? Or maybe we should become Muslims. And you think, no, if you said that then, you would probably be killed. You can't do a modern discussion when you're talking about centuries ago. You have to write it as best you can in the period. So yes, Genghis Khan was ruthless, but he was no more ruthless than a dozen other people of his day. So I try not to judge it, which in itself is a judgment, of course, because the lack of judgment can be a judgment. But it is a danger, I will say, of historical fiction that you end up liking everybody that you write about, because you spend your time trying to get inside their minds and to think, why are they doing this? You empathize with them. It is unavoidable. So you understand them, and to understand is to know, is to forgive. That's why I think, as I said earlier, it's nice to have a long distance in the past, because it would be much harder with a monster who was more recent. For me, the fact that there are 7 centuries or 2,000 years, for Julius Caesar in Gaul would have been considered the worst possible monster, of course. Luckily, it is 2,000 years ago, and we can see that in perspective. And I think that's important. It's sometimes difficult, but then if it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing. So.